Once upon a time, there was a mother who loved her children dearly. They lived in a high tower, otherwise known as an apartment building, and they were so very happy. The children played games and squealed with delight, eyes shining with the bright things they imagined. The only problem was the neighbours. Every time the children would play, the neighbours would complain to the mother. Eager to placate them, the mother would apologise, many times, and promise to keep her children quiet. Her days, once filled with cheerful games, began to circle around this one objective: keep the children quiet. The mother worried, of course, that her children were unhappy, but more important was avoiding the inevitable knocking on the door. "We're going mad," claimed the neighbours. Nobody asked the mother if she was going mad. One day, the mother stumbled upon a lifesaver: a square of Persian carpet she had bought to lay on the floor and muffle her children's footsteps. The children were obsessed with it. They pretended it was a magic carpet that took them to Inkuland. They played quietly for hours, and the mother felt, for the first time, relief from worry. But the children grew bored, and eventually they didn't want to play magic carpet anymore. The mother, of course, is desperate. Maybe if she plays with them? This works. They want to go to Inkuland with Mummy. But the carpet won't fly. Perhaps they need a little extra help? The mother gets her children to help her drag the carpet to the window. Surely the carpet will fly if it has a window to fly out of. The children are crying, which is a bit weird, but soon they'll all be in Inkuland where it's warm and the children can play as loud as they like. Except the children won't sit on the carpet now it's hanging out the window. Never mind. The mother knows her children will join her there soon. And then she launches herself into the clouds. Welcome to The Author Isn't Dead, a channel where you can find deep dives on the authors that you love and the authors you didn't even know existed. Today's video, the first video in fact, is an author I didn't know existed until about 2 weeks ago, but who is now probably one of my favourites of all time. She's been called the queen of domestic horror, the mistress of the mundane, the grandmother of psychodomestic noir. All of this is like a siren call to me. Her name is Celia Fremlin, and she wrote The Stuff of Nightmares. The story we open with is one such story of hers, the mother who is driven mad by her neighbours. It's called The Quiet Game, and it's from her collection Don't Go to Sleep in the Dark. To the casual readers of the 1950s, Celia Fremlin was the woman who turned the blockages of a kitchen sink or the cry of a colicky baby into a source of bone-chilling terror. But behind the spine-chilling mysteries lies a life defined by radical politics, incognito social investigation, and a fearless pursuit of the truth, no matter how uncomfortable. Born in 1914 and dying in 2009, Fremlin's writing has the unusual style of feeling at once kind of old and timeless, and yet also weirdly contemporary. Perhaps not surprising when you consider she was alive for 2 world wars, and also lived long enough to witness the internet. Facebook was already 5 years old when she passed. Though her work was central to the mid-century suspense tradition, she has recently undergone a major resurrection for a new generation of readers, including me, as publishers reissue the chilling mysteries she produced from the 1950s through the 1990s. This, evidently, is how I came across her. I like to go to my local bookstore from time to time when I've got like money to burn, and just kind of look at what's on the shelves, see what catches my attention, and obviously buy up books based on whatever takes my interest that day. I always end up buying a few books I've never heard of, especially if it's got a great cover, and I know you're not meant to judge books by their cover, but I think we all do, and some are awesome. And this is how I shimmied by Horror Haunted from where it was pinched tight between other books by authors with surnames beginning with F. It was the bright red and yellow spine, not to mention the words horror and haunted, that called to me, and I was sold without really reading anything further. Luckily for me, that turned out to be a good thing. So I read the collection and immediately ordered basically everything Fremlin has ever written. So, who is Fremlin, and how is she not more well known, and why should you perhaps read her? Celia Fremlin was born in 1914 in Kent. And from the very beginning, she was not your average person. She won a place at Somerville College, Oxford, which is one of the most prestigious women's colleges in the country, where she read classics and philosophy. She is a Bachelor of Arts student after my own heart. And while she was there, she published a piece of academic philosophy in the journal Analysis in 1938, arguing that we shouldn't limit thought to propositional logic. In other words, at 23 years old, Fremlin was challenging the likes of Wittgenstein, Carnap, and Tarski. So, bold. She joined the Communist Party less because she aligned herself with communists and more because, quote, it was where all the fun was. However, she thought the people she hung out with, her communist friends, were talking rubbish about working class life. So she decided basically to go and get a job as a kitchen maid, then as a domestic servant, and then as a charwoman to find out what working class life was really like. She wrote the whole experience up in a book called Seven Chars of Chelsea, published in 1940. And what makes this book interesting is that she opens it by basically undermining her own argument. She says that the entire enterprise is flawed and you basically shouldn't trust me as an author. She wrote that it was a, quote, striking condemnation of present-day society, that books like hers existed at all because in a properly functioning world, if you wanted to know what it was like to be a charwoman, you'd read books by a charwoman, not by dilettante Oxford graduates doing it for a few months. This book caught the eye of Tom Harrison, the founder of Mass Observation, which was this huge social research project that basically sent observers out into pubs and air raid shelters and factories to record what ordinary people were actually saying and thinking. He recruited her, and during the war she did a lot of this work, including writing the entire text of a book called War Factory, an account of life in a secret electronics factory, which was published under the Mass Observation name. And then, in the 1950s, she became a housewife in Hampstead. And though the stereotype of the housewife these days is that it's suffocatingly boring and archaically traditional, this job of Fremlin's is what gave much of her work its magic. Because she started noticing something. She was pushing a pram around Hampstead Heath in the middle of the night, barely awake, and it struck her that parental sleeplessness, this total grinding, disorienting exhaustion, was, as she put it, a major human experience that nobody had ever written about seriously. So, she wrote the book that she wanted to read, and in 1958 she published The Hours Before Dawn, her debut novel. It follows Louise, a young mother so wrecked by sleep deprivation that she genuinely cannot tell whether the sinister lodger who has just moved into her house is a threat or whether she's just losing her mind. And it won the Edgar Award. That's the American Mystery Writers Award, the biggest prize in crime fiction, in 1960. Some people are terrified of cosmic beasties, of demonic possession, of the small town slasher, and then there are people, like me, who are filled with dread at the thought of negotiating household chores with their partner, or who look down at their sweet little child and have intrusive thoughts about what they'd like to do if that child simply won't stop crying. Fremlin's horror comes not from the supernatural, with the occasional exception, but from the banal, the mundane, the ever so domestic drudgery. It's the house, the lodger, the endless nights, the husband who sleeps right through it, the neighbours watching through the hedge. It's the terror of being the person who is always awake, always responsible, and slowly starting to distrust your own perceptions. That's why we love her. A recent reviewer in the Herald put it brilliantly. Fremlin can, quote, take the humble living room and turn it into hell without spilling a single drop of blood. And that became her signature. Across 16 novels, Fremlin took the post-war suburban home, the living room, the kitchen, the semi-detached house, the mother-in-law staying in the spare room, and turned it into a pressure cooker. The critic Leah Price describes her as the love child of C. Wright Mills and Shirley Jackson. Think the sociological imagination meets dark maternal humour. I'd liken her writing to Shirley Jackson, yes, another favourite of mine, but also to Samantha Schweblin and Daphne du Maurier. In other words, if you like them, you may like Fremlin. She's also, Fremlin that is, fascinatingly even-handed about who the monsters are. So her short stories in Don't Go to Sleep in the Dark go after toxic femininity just as gleefully as toxic masculinity. Women who are cruel, manipulative, complicit. She's not interested in simple villains and victims. She's interested in the whole suffocating system. and how everyone inside gets warped by it. Now, time for a couple of fun factoids which I came across during my research, and they made me like Fremlin even more. So first, she was a night walker. In the 70s, Fremlin spent around 3 years walking the streets of London 1 or 2 nights a week, usually between 11 p.m. to 3 a.m. She deliberately roamed areas considered bad or high crime at the time, and as she wandered, she would interview those who she came across. She wanted to know if the prevailing fear of walking at night and the threat of violence was warranted. She decided to continue in the vein of her work with the Mass Observation Project, and rather than assume anything about how women felt, she went and asked them. Surprising to me, but apparently not to Fremlin, was the actual incidence of violence was extremely rare, and Fremlin determined that fear of fear was the primary threat to women walking. I don't know if that conclusion would hold up today, but ultimately, Fremlin declared that, quote, "We don't need more policemen on the beat, we need more grandmothers." The second fun fact is this. In old age, Celia Fremlin publicly spoke about how she had personally helped multiple friends die. She talked about it openly. She helped at least 4 people, friends with motor neuron disease, MS, severe osteoporosis, to end their lives using medication, and she sat with them as they died. She viewed it entirely as mercy. Quote, "About 1/3 to 1/2 of the elderly people I've known," she said, "have died with some sort of help from somebody." Fremlin has no regrets about her actions. She remembers how she assisted her friend Natalie to die and said, quote, "This was what I would call a complete success when I realized it had worked and she was absolutely dead. I longed for her to be alive for just one moment to say, 'We've done it, it has worked.' I longed to share the triumph with her." Fremlin advocated publicly for legalizing euthanasia until the end of her life. She kept a stash of medication that she periodically tested to make sure it still worked, and she died in 2009, aged 94. It's been hard for me to find any information on the cause of death, but let's assume that she went when she was ready and happy to go. So that's a deep dive, but surely not the whole story of Celia Fremlin, a woman who spent 70 years looking at ordinary domestic life and saying, "There's something deeply strange happening here. The house is not safe, the exhausted mother is not paranoid, the terror is real and it's coming from inside the building." Faber republished all her fiction in 2014, and they've been quietly reissuing her work ever since, so she is available to read right now in print and digital. In terms of where to start, I'd personally recommend starting the way I did with her short stories. Both collections, By Horror Haunted and Don't Go to Sleep in the Dark, are excellent. For all sources used to create this video, check out the description below. I've provided direct links to articles where possible, and if you have an author that you want me to cover, let me know in the comments. See you next time, and remember, the author isn't dead.